Greetings and blessings once again to each one of you who have joined this Zoom platform in our daily morning devotion, this special time with God, this time that we fellowship and in hearing His word, that we might be admonished, strengthened, and uplifted in our spiritual walk daily. We are studying the book of Proverbs, this very special book of wisdom that we see God through his servant Solomon and other wise men have helped people from all walks of life to easily understand these words of wisdom so that we can apply themselves unto our lives. Receiving the blessing from these words, we can live a life according to God's will. We will focus on verse 9 today of chapter 29, Proverbs 29, verse 9, reading the word. If a wise man, contends with a foolish man, whether the fool rages or laughs, there is no peace. Solomon, as the king of Israel, that undivided kingdom which his father David helped establish, expand, and by his authority on the nations of the world around them, he was able to bring peace and prosperity to his son Solomon, who followed David. And how God blessed Solomon, but with that wonderful gift that he chose of wisdom to rule God's people well. God gave him all other things besides, but this wonderful gift of wisdom. And as I see, Solomon is one who observes things very keenly. He understands intricately and draws lessons from the world outside of him, helping him to prepare himself to meet the world and the people that are therein. Solomon, once more, divides this world into two groups of people: those who are foolish and those who are wise. The basic difference is simply this, and that is, a wise man acknowledges God and relies on divine wisdom to lead his life, naturally in accordance with God's will. But here you have a foolish person, one who does not acknowledge an awareness of God in his life, one who even denies the presence and existence of God, one who therefore cannot acknowledge and accept God's wisdom for his life. And so the wise man, as he meets with a foolish man on this earth, this verse is telling us that you in no ways should contend with him. You should not even entertain a long conversation or lengthy association with such a person, because you may be the victim. You may be the one who will have to face the bad consequences of your association with a fool. And therefore the wise man is warning us, be on guard. There are people who are wise in this earth, people who acknowledge God, who choose to follow Him, who live a God-fearing life. But on the other side, a foolish person who even denies the existence of God, who disregards God's commandments, who refuses to accept God's plan for his life, who sees himself as the master of his life, and his decisions are made upon his own foolish thinking and never in conjunction with God's instructions. These two groups of people can easily be identified because they have different foundations upon which they base their life, their thinking, their actions. The principles that govern their life are totally different. No wonder this verse tells us that there may be instances where a wise man would have to deal with a foolish man, but in no ways should he enter into a contention or an argument or even any further altercation with such an individual. While this setting may suggest that it is perhaps a court scene where especially arguments are weighed, where decisions are made upon observations which are brought to discussion, verified, proved before actions are taken. But in such situations, you see a fool and his activity very clearly depicted. One who chooses to live a reckless life, one who is always uncontrolled in his actions and thoughts. And if you should touch a fool, either in his rage or in his laugh, in his scornfulness, in his disregard for truth, in his ridicule of truth, certainly a fool's presence cannot bring about peace. There can be no peace, as it were, virtually between these two different kinds of people. A fool, when he responds either in anger or in mocking, there will be certainly a great contention and a quarrel brewing. But with a righteous man, a wise man, even if there is a quarrel, a wise man would stay quiet, would observe things, and even by his silence, he is able to quell down that raging quarrel taking place. A fool adds fuel to the fire, but a wise man, even by his silence, would douse the fire. And so we are called very strictly and informed by this proverb that we have nothing to do with a foolish person, never to get into an argument, never into a contention. These are people that God is reminding us that we should keep ourselves away from, because a foolish person, either in his anger or in his laughing, we see he only springs surprises, argues unreasonably, and such only lead to futility. In no way can a fight be settled or resolved. A conflict cannot be peacefully or logically or constructively resolved, because these things would not be part of a foolish person's consideration. He would not think logically. He would not think of doing things constructively. He would not desire for peace, but only he would want to vent his anger. He would want his way. He would want his futile arguments to be carried. Such enterprise is only a waste of time. To engage in debates with those who do not consider wisdom or logic, speaking to them at length would be of no useful gain. By debates, certainly, you cannot win over any person. Through debate, you may show how much you know. You can put down a person showing how much he does not know. But a debate cannot bring two people to a settlement. You cannot bring peace. A debate is never a way to settle an issue, but rather only to show who is better than the other. And this situation would only aggravate the situation. And so the one who gains ascendancy by his debating skills will look down upon the other person who has been put down. And then the one who is down there will always look envious and try to cause destruction and speak evil and wicked things against that person. So we are to avoid as far as possible any kinds of debate, arguments. For arguments cannot win hearts. They may win a case, they may make a point, but it is never to win the heart. You cannot make the other person your friend and have peace with such an individual. For the fool's behavior, getting furious simply for simple reasons, mocking at others, laughing because he cannot see the light in what somebody else is saying. Many times, instead of addressing the issues, they may dodge and they may mislead and divert the course of action or the train of thought. Such kind of behavior is never to be entertained or to be indulged in. This verse is telling us that through arguments, and especially trying to settle issues with a fool, is something that we should not indulge in, that never seems to bring about positive results. And so we are called upon to be careful of how we relate with such kind of people who are toxic in their arguments, who are unproductive, who are of no help to people, who do not accept reason or logic. And choosing such people even for any simple help or even a work or responsibility would only ruin the plan of progress and success. And so we are called upon to certainly avoid arguments with scoffers, whose mind is always at war against God a person who will never change his mind even in the presence or with the awareness of God. Thus, we as wise people should be careful in the way how we deal with such people. Warning us about this kind of hopeless situation, we are called upon to be those who would learn wisdom and never to interfere with a foolish person who is stubbornly conceited, who is wicked and rebellious. You may find or use whatever means possible to reach him by anger or by humor, but you know, nothing can change the heart of a foolish person. It looks as if we as humans are not powerful enough to change a fool. But there is hope. There is only one physician who can heal this disease, only one counselor who can help speak to such in practicing foolishness, and that is only God. And it is only the absence of God that these foolish people deny in their words and actions. We can see them clearly as the psalmist says in Psalm 14:1. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. So here is a fool who denies that there is a God. And so their actions, without a consciousness of God, are only going to be corrupt, abominable, and nothing good we can see come out of such an individual. A fool is one who trusts his own heart, and he rejects instructions that others give. He has no consideration for those who are there to help him. We have seen in Proverbs this warning repeated again in chapter 28, 26. He that trusteth in his own heart is a fool. A fool is one who trusts in his own heart. He does not take advice and consideration from others. But he who walks wisely, he shall be delivered. To walk wisely in divine wisdom, we can have deliverance. In Proverbs 15, verse 5, a fool despiseth his father's instruction, but he that regardeth reproof is prudent. But a fool despises even his own father's instruction. You can see now how maybe a good son has, by following and practicing foolishness, by disregarding instructions of his father. He hates wisdom, but he loves foolishness and sees himself to be the one who is all-knowing. He thinks and he speaks and acts contrary to wisdom and conventional way how people speak. These people are those who lose always in life. People who choose to be on their own, being unwarned by instructions that God gives in his holy scriptures. And Solomon himself warns us that certainly there is no method how we can change such people. Such difficult people, for us to change is impossible. For the wise man himself said in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 12, the hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord hath made even both of them. God giving us these great powers of vision and hearing. If we can hear God, if we can see Him, certainly that is what can bring changes in our heart. Not when we have our hearts filled with self, pride, and arrogance, but one whose heart is ready to see God. Paul tells us in 2 Timothy chapter 2, 24 to 26, and the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle unto all men. He should not be one who will strive, one who will force himself, one who will even willing to fight for his cause. But he says, God seeks those who are gentle, men who are apt to teach, who are patient, who are meek in instructing those who oppose themselves. Yes, when we go and in preaching God's word, there are people who oppose us. Certainly, the world is against God and the truth. And when we teach God's truth, people will certainly oppose us. But we have to be patient, even when we are instructing people who would oppose us. And so we are called upon to be such people who are always ready to accept God's instructions and follow these. It is God who will eventually change the hearts of people and not human beings. For they, the wicked heart, the foolish heart is unreasonable. They have no faith, says Paul in 2 Timothy 3 verse 2. 2 Timothy 3 verse 2. And that he may be delivered from unreasonable and wicked men, for all men have not faith. This is the condition of most people that we find in this earth. They have no faith. Therefore, their lives are filled with evil and wickedness. They do not accept anything which is reasonable and acceptable in God's sight. Such unreasonable, wicked people, it is many times beyond human efforts to reach them unless God alone is able to change. For these people do not seek the living God. Paul tells us in Hebrews 11 verse 6, and without faith it is impossible to please God. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Yes, God calls us to be people of faith. And in the book of Proverbs, and especially in the book of Hebrews, we have a good roster of those men and women who excelled in faith, those who diligently sought God. Those people of faith will seek God, and they will then be rewarded. But for a fool, he does what pleases him. He shows no faith in his life. Thus, he is literally lost in his sin. They cannot be even corrected. As Proverbs tells us in chapter 27, verse 22, though thou shouldest bray a fool in a mortar among wheat and pestle, yet he will not in his foolishness depart from it. How you may try to put that foolish person into intense conditions like grinding in a mortar, trying to separate wheat and the chaff, even in such intense situations, a fool will not depart from his foolish ways. That to him becomes more important. He is one who will not accept correction and instructions. And so God is telling us how hard it might be with human beings. Just as when Jesus said, how hard it is for a rich man to enter heaven. Yes, his riches will come on its way, and it is very difficult for a rich person. But Jesus said, with man, it may be impossible, but with God, all things are possible. For us, we may think that a foolish person is so hard to manage, but it's only when such people turn to God. Yes, nothing is impossible for God. But for a fool, threats, intimidation, these will never do any good for him. Neither friendship or humor, he would reject them. And you may be, in dealing with such people, we may be frustrated. But God is telling us, we are to seek only God to help us. But rather, keeping away from them would be a safe option for many of us. Unless you're willing to risk and venture out, seek God's blessing to help such people. The Bible tells again very clearly concerning marriage with such people in 1 Samuel 25, verse 25. Let not, 1 Samuel 25, 29, let not my Lord, I pray thee, regard the man of Belial, even Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, folly is with him. We know the story of Nabal, whose name itself suggests that he is a foolish person, one who lacks much understanding. But the woman who married him, his wife, certainly would have suffered much from him. But in this chapter, when David sent his men to Nabal, whose flocks they were protecting and guarding as their shepherds took care of them. But when David was in need of food and he sends to Nabal at the time when he's having a celebration, a party for his workers, he would not budge to help David. And David, seeing how their goodness was returned with ridicule because Nabal was one who was a foolish person, never willing to help. And David decides that he would kill and destroy that foolish Nabal, for he is not worthy to live, because he was not even willing to help David and his men when they were in need. But when Nabal's servants were in need, David's men offered them protection. But finally, when David has vowed to completely exterminate the family of Nabal, the word reaches Abigail, his wife, Nabal's wife. We pity this lady as she had to face up to this foolish man who would not, in his right mind, even see danger and try to avoid it, but rather he would, in arrogance, defy and call upon death upon himself. But Abigail, by her wisdom, here is Nabal, by his foolishness, he was calling death upon himself. But Abigail, by using her wisdom, was able to change the heart of David. She quickly prepared the food that David needed and his men. He sends them over and goes to meet him, seeks favor from David, asks for forgiveness for the foolishness of her husband, and thus, by her wisdom and quick action, wisdom should always be followed by action. It's not enough to talk. Our words of wisdom should be seen in our actions. And Abigail quickly acted as well, sent forth food quickly, even before she would even come to meet David. Thus, she was able to soften the heart of David. She was able to avert a bloodshed. And later we know how David even married Abigail. Certainly, that is how a wise person would be able to diffuse and even counter the actions of a foolish person like her husband, and how even a great bloodshed was averted by such wise actions. We see in the scripture not many, but certainly foolish people, actions of such foolish magnitude we know are always what can cause detriment to the progress and development of God's people. But we should avoid at all costs any such foolishness and display of a lack of wisdom. But what can help in times of such foolishness in display is to let God's wisdom overtake. God's wisdom is able to turn the tables around. God's wisdom can help us avert the problems that we face. And therefore, today, we are taught in very strong terms to seek God's wisdom, to obey God's instructions, and to follow and be careful and watchful when you see such foolish people in this world who, through their foolishness, are not even worth living, but as their own foolishness would cause destruction upon them. A wise person and God's power can even change circumstances for a fool. And so let us be careful in dealing with them, but seeking God's help for them. And if a fool would accept, certainly there would be goodness. But we be careful, but do our part to do whatever is possible to let God's wisdom rule our lives. May God bless you as we seek to gain this wisdom of God through His scriptures, through divine instructions, through God's servants, that following these we may be able to walk in the paths of righteousness, turn hearts and lives of people, respond to God's power, and we may be His agents, showing God's wisdom to the world, and many seeing us may turn to God. God bless you and have a wonderful day.